In the mid-1960s, when I was pioneering, the political system was changing rapidly in the country, making it difficult for brothers to maintain their neutral stand. Brothers were beaten, their Bibles and literature burned for refusing to buy political party cards. They burned down the brothers' homes and Kingdom Hall in my area. I was stopped because of not having a political party card. They tied my hands and started beating me severely. When they went to have supper, one stayed behind to guard me. He felt very sorry for me and said they will kill you when they return. So he suggested that if I can be able to at least crawl, then he would untie me and allow me to escape. It was dark outside, and I dragged myself along until I reached a brother's home who kindly assisted me. Jehovah made a way out so that I could endure. An official announcement was made that the work of Jehovah's Witnesses was banned. I was taken to Chichiri prison and later transferred to Zomba prison, where they kept condemned criminals. I was kept in a cell next to the execution gallows. I thought I was also going to be executed as well. Jehovah calmed me, and remembering Romans 8:38, I was convinced that even death would not separate me from God's love. When I was released, I was so happy to be with Violet, my wife, and the children. But because it was extremely dangerous to stay in Malawi at that time, we had to go to Mozambique in Mlangeni camp, where we spent 3 years as refugees. We were permitted to have Bibles, songbooks, and other publications. When we look back at what happened at Mlangeni camp, we see that it was Jehovah helping us to prepare for the things ahead. We had to memorize scriptures and also kingdom songs. For the scriptures, for example, in 1974, the year text was taken at Habakkuk 3, verse 17 and 18. And verse 18 says that, "Yet as for me, I will exult in Jehovah. I will be joyful in the God of my salvation." We didn't know how helpful this text would be in the future.
We're hearing the story of Baston Nyirenda from Malawi as told in the April 2022 JW Broadcasting episode. Long-time viewers of this channel know exactly what I'm going to say here, because we're talking about the persecution of Jehovah's Witnesses in Malawi during the 60s and 70s. This is something that is brought up in the book Crisis of Conscience by Raymond Franz. It's one of the worst scandals in Jehovah's Witness history that the organization has masterfully covered up, so that you can only find out about it once you give yourself permission to start looking at apostate sources. Basically, there was a huge double standard at this point in the organization's history, so that whereas Jehovah's Witness men in Mexico were allowed to bribe officials to receive a cartilla card that meant that they were effectively enlisted in that country's reserves in the militia, just so that they could travel and find it easier to get employment and that kind of thing. While that was happening in Mexico, in Malawi, when a totalitarian regime took over and insisted that everyone have a card identifying themselves as supporters of the regime, in effect, supporters of the government, the only government in a totalitarian state, witnesses in Malawi were expected to refuse to buy that card. And as a result, unthinkable things happened. I cover all of this in a video I made called Betrayal. A thumbnail will appear if Tibor is gracious. It was just a horrendous double standard that led to witnesses in Malawi suffering unspeakably. And what we've heard in Baston's experience is just a tiny, tiny sampling. He talks about being imprisoned. He talks about being beaten. Don't get me wrong, those things are horrendous to experience, especially over one's personal religious beliefs. But I have to wonder why the organization routinely, when talking about Malawi, waters down what happened there. Because when you actually look up in the written publications what happened in Malawi, it's many, many times worse than what we've just had described. Baston has described buildings being destroyed, brothers being beaten, and brothers being imprisoned. That's essentially what we've heard. It gets way worse when we consult the 1999 yearbook, some of which I will read, but Tibor will show the whole thing so that I can't read all of it because it's so terrible, and I'm genuinely concerned about YouTube having issues. But anyway, also reports of beatings were received from all over Malawi. For some of our dear sisters, the persecution was especially harrowing. Many were the reports of, and I'm not going to read the next few words because of YouTube and that sort of thing, but you can see them on the screen. The sadistic attackers spared nobody. The elderly, the young, and even some pregnant sisters were put through such cruel ordeals. Some suffered miscarriages as a result. So that's what happened in Malawi, again, while a completely different standard was being applied regarding Christian neutrality in Mexico. Why the difference? And why is it that whenever Malawi is touched upon in the video material that's put out by Jehovah's Witnesses today, they tend to water it down? Now, it could be for the simple reason that children will be watching with their parents, and this material needs to be age appropriate. If that's the reason, that's a good reason. I can get behind that. But I'm sure there's a way of steering the audience in the direction of material that goes into more detail about how badly the witnesses in Malawi suffered and were killed and subjected to horrendous abuse. I can't help but wonder whether one reason why they don't at least steer people in that direction so that they can do more research is because they don't want this double standard to come to light. And also, the more you learn about what happened in Malawi, the more it calls into question the disproportionate focus on what's happening in Russia. So you have in Russia incarceration, you have witnesses being held in pre-trial detention, you have reports of beatings, and there have been reports of torture. But we're not talking about all Jehovah's Witnesses. We're talking about, I think, a few hundred cases. And we're not talking about anything as severe as what happened in Malawi. But because it suits the organization's narrative, regarding the end times and regarding Armageddon and the Great Tribulation, Russia is so important that it gets essentially awarded the status of the King of the North. And the Russian government is somehow part of the unfolding of Bible prophecy. Well, if Russia's persecution of Jehovah's Witnesses is enough for them to be made the King of the North in the new light, what do we say about Malawi and what happened there? Why does Malawi get no significance? It's all very odd, isn't it? So I simply cannot help but recoil at the way Malawi is dealt with in Jehovah's Witness propaganda. And you'll also notice how Baston refers to Jehovah's hand. He says the following:
It was dark outside, and I dragged myself along until I reached a brother's home who kindly assisted me. Jehovah made a way out so that I could endure.
Jehovah made a way out so that Baston could endure. It was important that Baston had a way out. Well, why wasn't it important that witnesses who were killed or violently abused, why wasn't it important for them to have a way out? I really struggle with this sort of arrogance. And I can understand, I can sympathize, because I once had similar leanings when I was religious. I used to rationalize in that sort of way. But when you really, really think about it, what an arrogant attitude to take. I'm Baston and I was important enough to be spared. What on earth do you say to those relatives who mourn those who died when you're coming out with that sort of argumentation? And he goes on to talk about when they were in the Mlangeni camp, how Jehovah helped them prepare for the things ahead by giving them Habakkuk 3:17 and 18. We didn't know how helpful this text would be in the future. That's how Jehovah intervened in one of the most appalling cases of persecution in the history of the Jehovah's Witness religion. Jehovah intervenes by giving them a verse in Habakkuk to think about. I'm sorry, it's not convincing. And again, I really do have a problem with the way this organization glosses over what happened in Malawi and puts disproportionate emphasis on the persecution in Russia.